To confirm, he did have the cleft lip and palate.
Yeah.
Quite severe.
Yeah,
too,
it was severe. He was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate, and his premaxilla was like pushed up. So his whole like part of his lip. So his lips were completely spread open, and his like front part went like this. So he didn't have nostrils or anything like that. It was just like the bridge of his nose and then up. So, and he had no palate at all. So no hard or soft palate. It was just completely open. Like you could shove your finger up there and it would pop out his nose. Like his anatomy was crazy. It was super interesting when he was first born, actually.
Wow. Well, welcome back to Smashed Oranges, everybody. We are so excited today to have another guest with us. This is Brittany. She's part of my family. She's engaged to my cousin, and we actually have kids that are very similar in age now. And so it's been kind of a fun journey for us to grow together as mothers and get to know each other that way. And we're excited to hear a little bit more about what that journey has looked like for you guys. Your fiance, Dallin.
Yes.
And you have had a very interesting journey right from the very beginning of your pregnancy. And so I would love to hear just what that beginning looks like, because you are still dealing with some medical complications with your son, but things have gone really well lately. So
yes,
yeah, start us from the beginning.
Yeah, so going back to the beginning, I got pregnant in October of 2022. Very unexpectedly, was not planned at all, was not thinking about having kids for a very long time. But a throat infection that I got and some antibiotics prescribed to me, which canceled out my birth control, and there came my son, Lucas. So
did your doctor warn you that antibiotics cancel birth control?
No, but apparently it's a really well-known fact. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that. So warning to our listeners.
Yeah. So it was very unexpected and pretty early into mine and Dallin's relationship as well. So that was also a shock. So in October 2022, I found out I was pregnant at work, actually.
Oh, no.
So that was even more crazy because I couldn't, it was at lunchtime, and I had realized that I was supposed to restart my pills after, you have that break week. And Dallin was like, you're acting a little weird lately. And I was like, oh, that's nice. Well, it's because, and then I realized that my period was late, and I was like, oh my gosh, should I take a test? But then I was like, there's no way. I was religious taking my pills all the time, but my friend convinced me, and it was positive. Instantly, 2 dark lines, and I was like, this is great.
Oh my goodness.
It was a huge shock.
And so you did the test at work on the lunch break?
I did the test at work in the Chinook Mall food court bathroom.
Now we'll all know.
Yes.
So hallowed halls.
Yes. Yeah. So I found it at work, and then I just was so shocked and anxious I couldn't keep it in, but I couldn't go home because I had meetings all afternoon. So I told Dallin, actually, I called him and I told him, and then I had to go. So it was, and then after work, I had went back to Dallin's, and we took 3 more tests, and they all just positive one after another. So it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
What was going through your head then? Kind of that whole afternoon?
Really just, oh my gosh, but this isn't real. Maybe they're faulty. I was trying to convince myself it wasn't real, because I was like, this new boyfriend, we haven't been dating for that long. This can't be happening. This isn't happening. I'm so good with my pills. And I actually had called my doctor. And then that's when he told me on the phone that, oh, you're taking this type of antibiotic and birth control. And yeah.
Oh, no.
So it was crazy.
If you mind my asking, how long had you guys been together at this point?
We started talking in July, and we only officially started dating at the end of August. And mind you, this was in October, mid-October. So we had only even just met at the end of July of that summer of 2022, and just got serious and exclusive and started officially dating at the end of August. And then this happened in October.
Wow.
So it's crazy. I'm pretty sure, sorry, Dale and Sheila, but I'm pretty sure I only met them once, Dallin's parents, before even announcing, telling them that we were actually pregnant.
That's so
the next
brutal.
time I met them.
Oh my goodness. Wow. And so you had not anticipated being a mother that soon, obviously.
Nope.
So what was that like? I know we've talked about Maddie's kind of similar experience where she was just all of a sudden my future was a blank slate and I didn't know what life was going to look like. Did you kind of have a similar experience where you're just like, what am I going to do? Like, did you ever think about any other alternatives or anything like that?
No, when I found out, I mean, I've grown up, like, I grew up in a big-ish family, and my sister, I'm the youngest, so my siblings are, like, way older than me, and my sisters have kids already and things like that, so I have nieces and nephews where I was like, okay, like, I've grown up with them and things like that, and I knew I always wanted to be a mom, I just didn't know it was that soon, so I was kind of like, what the heck, because I, like, just got a good job. I was, like, settling down in my job. I was only 24, so I was like, this is not where I thought I was supposed to be. So there were times where I was upset about it, but I never thought of doing anything else. I was like, okay, well, this must be, like, what God wants me to do at this point in time. So this must have happened for a reason. So we stuck with it, obviously, and yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's amazing. I'm so glad that you went forward with a very optimistic point of view. It sounds like you, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So as you got further along in your pregnancy and you started to go to your prenatal visits, then I've heard a little bit that that's where things started to get a little complicated medically. So what were the diagnostics from the doctors at that point?
So, being 24, I was healthy, I lived a healthy lifestyle, I would say. There was no, like, history in my family of any, like, prenatal abnormalities. Nobody else in, like, my family has any sort of issues with their kids. Like, my siblings' kids are, like, they didn't have any problems, nothing like that. So, when you get pregnant, you don't think something's going to go wrong. You don't ever think of that. And I was like, oh, I'm 24, I'm healthy, I'm good. So we went, at the beginning it was good, like, our 12-week scan that you get, nothing. The sonographer didn't catch anything, like, everything was low risk. My blood work was fine. So we carried on and we were like, okay. And I remember actually, because I'm a pretty anxious person, so I remember after my 12-week scan, they say, oh, if there's something wrong, we'll call you. And if not, we'll just send the report to your doctor. And that's that. So I didn't get anything. And then the report uploaded on my health chart and I was reading it and it was like, oh, it's all good. So I remember I was, like, pumped and I told Dallin and I was like, okay, we can announce, like, everything is okay. Not that, like, you can't announce before, but being, like, a first-time parent, I was like, let's wait a little bit that first time around. So then we announced and everything was good, or so we thought. And then we didn't have another ultrasound till about the 19 or 20 week, whenever you get the anatomy detailed scan. And that day was probably the worst day of my entire life. It was February 24th, 2023, and our world just flipped, like, completely upside down. We woke up in the morning and I had just a feeling the whole morning that something was up. And Dallin was like, no, we're going to go. They're going to say everything's fine. We're going to find out the gender. We're going to come home and we're going to move on. And you're going to keep cooking the baby and it's going to be good. But I just, like, I thought something was off the whole morning. I was like, I don't feel right. So I got a call, actually, because we were supposed to go to a different EFW location and they had a flooding. Oh. So they were like, it was super weird. So they had a flood. So they sent us to another EFW, which happened to be a maternal fetal medicine specialty area.
Really?
So we actually went there, and it's by the Foothills Hospital where I gave birth to Lucas. And we went in, and I remember the sonographer. I think that's what they're called, right? I keep referring to it as that. Yes, and she was so nice to us when we first came. She was very happy, very talkative. Like, she was like, "Are you guys excited? Are you finding out the gender?" Super happy girl, very positive, radiant. And I was like, okay. I felt a little better walking into the room. And then she starts scanning, and everything's okay. And she's still talking to us. And there was, like, a student that was sitting in the room as well. Oh boy. We're sitting there, and Dallin's beside me, and then she starts just slowly, like, getting quiet. And, like, for us, like, we look at the MRI or the ultrasound, we don't know what we're looking at.
Yeah.
So she's doing things and she's looking and she keeps, at first she was like, this is the stomach. And she kept, like, going to his stomach. And then she would go back and she would, like, take a bunch of pictures. Then I just thought everything started to get weird. She was super quiet and she kept going to Lucas's stomach. And she's like, sorry, I'm just trying to see a better picture. But she was taking a lot of pictures, and I was like, that's super weird. Like, in my head, I was like, something's not right. And I kept looking at Dallin, and he was oblivious. He was just sitting there, like, this is normal.
Yeah.
And then she was like, okay, let's see your baby's face. And I was looking at her, scanning, And she went over his face and she like dropped the wand. And I was like, that's weird. And then she was like, okay, let's find out the gender. And she like moved on from the face and like went to the bum, and you could easily tell Lucas was a boy. So like we had a sweet little moment for a second, but I was like, something's wrong. Like this isn't normal. Like why is she like so quiet, and why does she keep going back to certain things? So then she was like, okay, I just have to get the doctor 1 second. And we were like, okay. And then the student and her both went out, and I was like, do you think something's wrong? And Tom's like, no, it's fine. This is what normally happens. And I was like, I don't know. She kept going back to his stomach. And I remember I just kept saying that as she kept going back to his stomach. And then she comes in, and this doctor comes in. He must have been like, he was old. And he comes in, he's looking, and he's like, do we have her first trimester screening? And then the sonographer was like, yeah, it was negative. And he was like, okay, go back to that picture. Okay, now show me this picture. Okay, now go back to this picture. And I was like, something's not right. Like, why are they coming in looking? So then he goes, okay, I'll be right back. And he walks out. And then the sonographer walks out. And I was like, something's wrong, Dallin. Like, why are they? Dallin's still oblivious. He's like, no. They have to like make sure everything's good. It's fine. And then the doctor comes in again. He looks at the computer and he goes, okay. And then he looks at me and he goes, word for word, we're seeing a lot of concerning things. We need to bring you into a room right now. And it was basically like, get up, wipe the jelly off your stomach. We're going into another room. And we were like, okay. So they brought us into this room. They shut the door and they left. And it was probably like 25 minutes that they just left us in this room. And we were like, what is happening? So I was like, Dallin, something's wrong. Like, that's like, they're saying concerning things. Like, what does that mean? I was like, something's wrong with his tummy. That's just all I kept saying, because I just realized that that's what she kept doing. And then Dallin was like, well, maybe it's something minor, like maybe like it's okay. And I was like, why would they and it was like a rush, like it was like, get up, like we're going. So then we're sitting there, and then 3 people come in, and then another lady. So the nurse like stood in the back, and then it was like a doctor, a student doctor, and somebody else, I don't know. So they come in with all these pieces of paper, and they basically go, your baby's not compatible with life. It has this, and this. You need to schedule medical termination. That was pretty much what they said. Yeah. And we were like, what? And the lady was like, so your baby has, and listed off this huge list of things, and was like, it's in keeping for this one, like syndrome that's not compatible with life. We need to schedule you to medically terminate. And my fiance Dallin at the time was like, hold on, like give us a second. Like you're coming in here and you're saying all this stuff, and we have no idea what's going on. Like we came here to find out our baby's gender and to see our baby, and now you're saying all this stuff is happening.
Yeah.
So then we were just frazzled, upset, crying, like we didn't know what was going on. We asked them to leave the room for a second. And so when they left the room, they left us the paper. And then on the list of paper, it was like clinical findings, and it was like cleft lip and palate, an omphalocele, a cyst in the cord, a straight umbilical cord. Like it was just listing all of this stuff. And then at the bottom it said in keepings for trisomy 18. And then it said medical termination with a star on it. And we were like, what? And then I remember I had no idea. Like I knew what a cleft lip and palate was, but you don't know. Like if you're not dealing with it, you don't know. So I was like, oh, really? They're saying to medically terminate over a cleft lip? And then there's another thing, which is an omphalocele, and basically when we Googled it in the room, it was like the organs are growing on the outside of its body.
Oh, wow.
And then there was a bunch of problems with the umbilical cord. And we were like, and then it said trisomy 18, and we Googled it, and basically it's like another word for Edwards syndrome. And basically they aren't, most times the fetus won't live outside the womb, or they are incompatible with life, or like severely disabled. And whether they live till 3 or whatever there's only like, I think 1 or 2 people that have lived to adulthood, but it wasn't, it was like in a vegetative state, I think I read.
Oh, wow.
So we read that and we're like, our baby has this? Like how? Like we're healthy, like we didn't do anything wrong, like what is going on? So then they came back and they were just pushing us to terminate. They wanted us to set a date. So our ultrasound was on a Friday, and they were pushing us to do it on the Monday or the Tuesday.
Whoa.
And they basically were like, you need to do this, blah, blah, blah. And then they were like, well, you do have other options if you want, but with all of this stuff, this is what is most likely happening. And we were like, okay. And they were like, if you want to do genetic testing, you can. So we were like, what do we do? And they were like, I was like, well, let's do genetic testing, because what if like you're wrong? Like what if you're just, because then I said, are you assuming it has this because you found these things, or does it? can you say it has this syndrome?
definitively.
And they were like, we don't know, but the findings can keep with this syndrome. So we were like, no, we're going to do genetic testing. That's stupid. Why would we just medically terminate our baby without fully knowing? Like, what if what you're saying is wrong? So basically it was like 4 p.m. and they told us we needed to get blood work that day. So they told us to drive to the Foothills Hospital lab and go get the blood work. However, they were closed. They didn't know, but they were under construction. So we were running around, we left and we were running around like a chicken with our heads cut off, like trying to find a lab to take blood so we could get the genetic testing done. And then we finally found one. We got the blood work done. We sent it in. And then it was the weekend. So it was like a lull. And it was like we just had to wait.
And wait and worry.
Yeah, so they were like, don't Google anything because that will make it worse. And it's like, we're in the age of Google. Like, you think we're not going to start Googling things?
Yeah.
So it was the weekend. I remember my fiance's parents came that night and we were talking to them about it and they were like, well, no, it's going to be okay. And we were like, well, no, it might not be. Like, if he has this, like, he can't live outside the womb. Like, they are telling us there's all these things. And when you Google it, like, horrible things come up. And it's like, okay, well, let's just wait. And so we were actually going to Edmonton the next day for a day trip to go to the water park with some of other Dallin's family. And then we were like, well, let's not go. Like, this is horrible. Like, we're going to lose our baby. Why would we go to Edmonton and try to mask having fun in front of these family members when we're like literally heartbroken?
Yeah.
And then we were like, well, no, let's just go. And up until this point, for reference, for a side note for later, I hadn't felt Lucas kick. Like, I haven't felt him kick yet. I didn't feel him, no flutters or anything yet. So we decided to go to Edmonton because we were like, well, let's just go. We can tell the parents. They'll obviously be super supportive. And so we went. And when we were at West Edmonton Mall, we actually bought it's kind of sad. We bought like a burial outfit for Lucas that we actually have in a frame still.
Oh my gosh.
Because that's what we thought. We thought he wasn't going to make it. Wow. So we went and we bought like a little outfit for him and like to remember him. It was I remember even like emailing my boss like in the mall and saying, I remember like.
Can't look at you.
I remember emailing my boss in the mall and being like, this is confidential, but this is going on. Like, I'm taking time off work. I'm sorry. Like, I'll get a doctor's note, but I can't. And he was very supportive too. He emailed me back like right away and was like, no worries, Brittany. Like, I totally get it. Take care of your family and things like that. So we did that. And then that night we were in the hotel room and I was sitting there and we were just trying not to freak out. We were just relaxing and I felt Lucas kick for the first time. And I thought that was a sign. I was like, he's telling me he's okay, Dallin, because I was sitting there and it felt like something like came up my throat and I was like, that was weird. And I sat up and all of a sudden it was just like kicks upon kicks. And I was like, Dallin, like, that's Lucas. Like, he's telling me he's okay. And we knew his name from the get-go. Like, that was always going to be his name. And I was like, he's kicking me. Like, he's telling me he's okay. And I always thought that was a sign of him. What are the odds that that's when he had kicked, when we were like, okay, we haven't felt him, or I haven't felt him kick before, and now after all this he's kicking and he's telling me he's okay. I mean, it could have been random coincidence, but I took it as a sign. I was like, you're telling me you're okay. So then on Monday we went back in and I was like, I went an amnio, like centesis, and that's when they like take the big needle and pull the fluid out. So it was like fast. Like, as soon as we knew all of this on Friday, everything was like super fast. On Tuesday, I had the amnio right in the morning. So we went in, same place as the ultrasound. So from that point on, we always went to like the maternal fetal medicine clinic. I had the amnio done and it was the worst pain. Everybody says it's painless. Like, when you read even the procedure, like, it's like, no, it's painless. You don't feel anything, like mild discomfort. It was the most painful thing. I'd probably rather childbirth 100 times over than have an amnio again. But basically, they did the amnio, so they were testing for the three, so they were testing for Down syndrome and then trisomy 13 and then trisomy 18, which trisomy 18 is the one that they thought Lucas had. So that was for the amnio specifically. So they took that and I think it was like the next day, like they sped rushed it because they knew we weren't up, like we didn't want to do medical termination. So we wanted to find out as soon as we could what the issue was. So they did that, and it came back, and it was negative for all of them. So he didn't have that. And that was a huge relief. We're like, okay, he doesn't have what they were saying. And then the doctors still were pushing. They were like, well, something has to be wrong because he wouldn't have all of these things. Like they were like, if he just had like one isolated thing, it could just be like random or whatever. But the fact that he has so many things going on, and we were like, okay, well, is there any other genetic testing we can do to see what's going on? And they were like, yeah, we're going to test for this specific one. It's called Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome. And it basically could be a syndrome associated with cleft lip and palate and omphalocele and everything else. So they tested for that, and essentially they already had everything they needed. Like they had the amniotic fluid, so they didn't need to do anything further. Great. I think I had to get like a little bit more blood work, but that was pretty much it. So they did that, and it came back negative right away, which was good. So this was like probably beginning of March that we're at this point. And then we were going for weekly ultrasounds. Every single week we would have to go for an ultrasound. Holy. But every time we would go for an ultrasound, the omphalocele, when they thought Lucas's organs were growing on the outside of his body, kept getting smaller as he grew in the womb. Wow. And they were like, this is super weird. Like, maybe it's not an omphalocele. Like, maybe it's something else. So I'm like, okay, you're telling me you thought my baby's organs were growing on the outside of his body, but now you're telling me it might not be that. And they're like, well, it could be actually just like a cyst in the cord that we're seeing. So completely different from your baby's organs are growing on the outside of his body to, oh, maybe it's just a cyst in the cord, and that's why the cord is you have problems with your cord.
That's insane.
And we were like, this is crazy. Like, what is it? Like, at this point, I was pretty frustrated with medical professionals. I was like, you're telling me all these things. You're telling me to terminate my baby. Like, but then everything's coming back fine. Like, what is going on? And in the grand scheme of things, because the thing we deal with now the most is Lucas's cleft lip and palate, but in the grand scheme of things, at that time when Lucas was still prenatal, that didn't seem like our biggest concern. We just wanted Lucas to survive. Yes. So essentially, every time we would go for an ultrasound, it would get smaller and smaller, and they were getting suspicious that maybe it wasn't the omphalocele and all this stuff, and it was just so crazy. And then we did one more genetic testing, and it was to test all of us. So to test me, to test Dallin, and to test Lucas. And this one was a whole DNA sequence testing of me, Dallin, and Lucas to see if maybe we have a mutation we have no idea about, if Dallin had one, and if Lucas has one. So we obviously I don't know how good you are at biology. I'm horrible. Yeah, I just go to what they tell me. But essentially, like we all obviously have our own DNA sequence, and the sequence makes up of whatever, blah, 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 chromosomes and all that. So me and Dallin were clear, like nothing was weird or whack on our DNA sequencing. But in April, whatever day Easter Monday was, it was Easter Monday in April, we get a phone call. And our previous phone calls to our genetic testing were always, everything's good, you're all good, bye. So we get a phone call on Easter morning, and it was, we have the genetic results back, and they actually sent to Finland, which was kind of cool. Oh, wow. Yeah, so they sent them to Finland, and then they came back, and they were like, do you guys have time for a phone call? Or like a Zoom call, sorry. And we were like, sure, when? And they were like, well, can you do it right away? And then we knew they must have found something, because why would they be wanting to do a Zoom call when everything else was fine? So we were like, okay. So we get on the Zoom call, and she like pulls up all these weird, like not Google searches, but it was like DNA sequencing and things like that. So she told us that me and Dallin were fine, but she said they found something in Lucas's DNA sequence that was off. And she couldn't even explain to us what it was. It was just, we all have this gene, and it's called the RERE gene, and it's responsible for making your protein for like child development in the womb. Mm-hmm. So we all have two of them. And Lucas, he's not missing any, but he doesn't have multiple of them. It's just there's an error code in that gene, and they don't even know how to describe it to us. They don't even know how to explain it to us. He's not missing any. He doesn't have more, but there's an error code. And we were like, well, what does that mean? And then it made sense for his cleft lip and palate, because if it's responsible for, developmental of the tissues and stuff before birth, obviously his tissues didn't form correctly, so that's why. But we were like, you can't tell us more. And they were like, only 19 people in the world up to that date have been identified with it. But only Lucas has been identified with that specific error code in medical history.
Holy
So we
moly.
were like, okay, what does this mean? And then here we go again. Our genetics counselor just listed all of this stuff, like
That could go wrong.
that could go wrong, like neurodevelopmental disorder, problems with the heart, problems with the eyes, problems with the ears, like
so up and down.
yeah, developmental delays, like autism spectrum disorder, like ADHD, like all, like everything in the book you could name was on this like sheet. And we were like, okay. And then she was like, I'm sorry, I don't really have much else to tell you because we don't really know. We don't know. And we're like, okay. And then she goes, with this information, and mind you, it's like mid-April. I'm due at the end of June. I'm already like almost like third trimester pregnant probably at this point. And she still goes, are you sure you want to continue on with your pregnancy? And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, yes, like at this point, no matter what happens, I'm going to continue on. And so we got that news on Easter, and it was kind of like, I remember being upset about it, but I remember not being upset about it at the same time because it was kind of like, everything else that we were told, this kind of was like, okay, he has a mutation in his genes, something.
Nothing had been quite definitive up to
this point in time. So we were like, okay, maybe like he'll be fine. Like people have random mutations in their genes all the time and nobody knows. Like we're only just getting to like advanced technology now. Whereas what if somebody that was born 30 years ago had ADHD and a developmental delay, and it could have been from that, but they don't know, and they grew up and they're
Right.
I hate the word normal, but they're fine.
Yeah.
So it's like I was like, okay, that we'll just take this news one day at a time. So we told our parents, and I remember my dad was like, well, he'll be okay, Brittany, he'll be fine. And I was like, well, what if he's not? And my dad was like, well, you can't always say like what if, like you just gotta go, like you just gotta live day by day and see
what are the options at that point, right? You're like,
so we were like, okay. And then it was time. I can't remember where I was in the story, but they did rule out that it wasn't Lucas's organs growing on the outside of his body.
Great.
It was in fact just, we don't even know what it was either. It had to be surgically removed, but I'll get to that point. It was a little like blockage in the umbilical cord.
oh, okay.
That's what they thought were the organs, but they weren't. So when Lucas was born, everything was where it was supposed to be there.
Wow.
So that was
Quite a
crazy.
wild.
It was
Quite a
a change.
Yeah.
So now with this gene mutation, Lucas was at risk for a heart problem. And up to this point, they never did like a fetal echo on his heart because we didn't know. So then we had to do a fetal echo on his heart. And I was freaking out the entire time because I was like, what if something, like the heart is the main, like your main thing that keeps you alive. Like what if something's wrong with his heart and we don't know? They haven't focused on that. They've just been focusing on his stomach and his cleft and things like that. But then again, we just one day at a time, one ultrasound at a time. I must have had like 50 ultrasounds. Like it was insane. So they did the fetal echo on his heart, and the sonographer that did it was the kindest lady I've ever met in my entire life. She could tell, we're young, we're scared, like we've been told all this stuff. She, at the end, was like, I'm not the doctor, I can't officially tell you, but she was like, I've been doing this for 30 years, and your baby's heart looks fine. Like, so we were like, okay, because I was like crying as she was doing it, and it was just, it was such an emotional experience, and I think I blocked a lot of it out.
Yeah, very
But
traumatic.
yeah, and then the doctor came in and said his heart was perfect, like his heart was fine, there was nothing wrong with it. So I was like, okay, well, maybe he's like defeating all the odds that are against him. Like he has so many odds that are against him. So then we kept going for weekly ultrasounds. He was growing good. They would check what was supposed to be wrong according to this gene thing, and he was fine.
Wow. That's amazing. So your diagnostic at the very beginning was quite bleak.
Yeah.
Very bleak.
Yeah,
Kinda
basically
given, like,
terminate
no
your
options.
baby. Yeah, he's gonna die.
And
yeah.
then it continued to get better and better. You guys are
Yeah.
amazing and inspiring for well, I think your dad's advice was spot on. You just have to take it day at a time.
Yeah.
So that's incredible. And remind me, Brittany, did you go full term with your pregnancy?
I was 37 weeks, so I was like just at full term because I think when you're at 37, that's
it's
when
like
they say
just-
like it's and we were at risk for preterm labor too,
Okay.
and I was a preemie, so we were even more at risk for preterm labor.
Right.
So, I went 37 weeks, I think. Yeah, it was June 29th. We Dallin was doing like a work thing, and I was helping him, and I remember just feeling crampy the whole day, and I was like, "This is weird."
Are our
Like,
babies born on the same day?
my baby was born on June 30th.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. They got the same birthday.
That's so cool. Yeah, June 30th. So I was helping Dallin at work, and I just felt crampy, and I was like, is this labor? And my sister had just had a baby 2 weeks before me, and that was her third, and she was like, no, you're not in labor yet, Brittany, like, calm down, it's fine. And I was like, okay. So then that evening, Dallin's a night owl, so he'd stayed up, and I like to go to bed super early, so I would always go to bed early. So I remember I went to bed, and Dallin was playing video games, and we lived in an apartment at the time, so when we just came out of our bedroom, the living room was right there. So I remember I woke up, and it was midnight, and I remember I sat up, and I was like, something's not right. And I remember going to the bathroom, and I was leaking amniotic fluid, and I had Googled it, because I didn't know at the time, and that's what it said, but it said it was normal nearing the end of pregnancy. And I was like, okay, like maybe because I'm nearing like the end, it's fine. But I remember telling Dallin just to note it. I was like, just so you know, this is happening, but it should be fine. It says it's normal. And then I went back to sleep, and then Dallin came in like 2 seconds later and was like, well, just in case anything happens, maybe I'll get some sleep. And I was like, okay. Yeah. So then we go back to bed, and it's like 2 a.m. And I sit up, and Dallin's just watching videos on his phone, still awake. And I'm like, I thought you were going to sleep, but that's okay. And then
We've all lived and learned
He
this
wishes he had gone to sleep.
yeah, he does.
I feel that
he does.
personally.
Yeah. So I look over, and he was like, are you okay? And I was like, I don't know. And I sat up really fast, and I felt like a gush. And I was like, And I was like, well, I'm 37 weeks, so it's okay if I do go into labor, right? And he was like, yeah, I think so. And mind you, we had no choice of what our birth was.
Yes.
Like, we were going to the Foothills Hospital. They had a team for us ready. Like, we had no choice of where the birth was happening or what, like, how we could do the birth. So we had to go to the hospital. And I remember I sat up, and then I stood up, and it was like a gush, like literally out of a movie. Like, I didn't think it was actually like that, but I experienced that, and my water had broke. And I remember at that point, I was freaking out, because I was like, at this point, I had bottled up all of my emotions of what the outside was going to look like.
Yeah.
Right.
Once Lucas was here with the cleft lip and palate and things like that. Because like I mentioned previously, that didn't seem like the biggest deal to us at the time. We just wanted him to survive. And we had met with, like, we had consultations with the Alberta Children's Hospital Cleft team before Lucas was born.
Okay.
But it was just kind of like this will happen, and when it does, like, it'll happen. So it was kind of brushed off all the time, because I was just mainly focusing on having my baby survive. Yeah. So then I was like, oh my gosh, now we're going to like have to deal with this. And there's things that we're going to have to deal with that we don't know. Like,
Never
if
experienced.
so so my water broke at 2 a.m. We went to the hospital. They sent us home because they were super busy and didn't have enough beds. And we were like, okay. So we got there at 4. They sent us home at 6. And we're like, okay, if you don't hear from us by 2 and your contractions haven't started by 2, you need to come back, because then there's that risk of infection after your water breaks or something. And so we get home at 8 a.m. and they call at 9:30 saying to come back. They have a bed.
Oh, you're kidding.
And at the time, we lived like 5 minutes away from the Phillips Hospital, so it wasn't terrible. But I was like, are you kidding me? We came all the way home, and now we're going all the way back. But we went back to the hospital. And then when we got there, we got into a bed, and everything was fine. I wasn't contracting or anything. And we just met like several people. And they would come in and be like, okay, just so you know, we're going to have like code blue on standby in case your baby comes out like not breathing. And I don't know if like medical professionals are like desensitized to what they're saying.
They are.
But like
They are.
sometimes they just come at you, and you're like, okay, this, like, I wasn't thinking that Lucas wasn't going to come out not breathing, but they were like, yeah, so you know, there's a chance he could come out not breathing. We don't know with the medical thing, so we're going to have code blue on standby and the NICU team on standby and just all of these people. And I think I was starting to get upset at that point, because I knew, like, I think I would have given birth in a hospital anyways, regardless of his complications, but it just felt so impersonal, and it felt so like, I felt so like just open. Like, there was probably, at the time that he was being born, there was probably like 30 people in the small birthing room, and you're just vulnerable, and you're just open, and it was tough, because it wasn't like, it just like wasn't, it didn't feel like I couldn't focus on Dallin and me and birthing this baby. I was focusing on everybody else in this room.
Oh, Brittany, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it was crazy, but I knew it was what was best for Lucas coming out. We didn't know. So I kind of had a lull during the day. Like, my contractions weren't starting, so they had to like put what is that medicine? Pitocin or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had to start on that. And then by 5 o'clock, I started getting contractions. And then like 8 p.m. was go time. And everything was so a blur from 8 p.m. to 10:34 when he was born.
Oh, wow.
That I just don't even, there were so many people just in and out. And there were so many people talking to me. And they were like, we might just have to take your baby weight. And I found as my labor was progressing, more people would just come to me and be like, just so you know, this is going to happen. Or just so you know, this is going to happen. And I was like,
So stressful.
how about we just, how about I just get him out and then you can deal with
what
it.
you need to do.
Yeah. So there was like so many people. And I remember when you're in labor, obviously you guys have experienced it. You don't, like, you're not thinking about, oh, I'm naked and people are watching me. Like, you're not thinking of that. It's just, I remember just feeling so sad on the inside. Like, I was doing this beautiful thing, but I was just like, everybody's just waiting to see this baby with this random medical gene error that they've never seen before. And I felt like it was almost just like they were watching just to like see,
science project.
like a science project. Yeah, exactly.
I've heard that about Foothills because it's an education facility as well.
That's what it felt like for sure. I was like, this sucks. Like, this isn't good. And then right before Lucas was born, I almost had him myself pushing, and then I basically wasn't asked permission, and I don't even know. I thought they're supposed to ask you before they do stuff. Like, they asked me if they could use the vacuum, and I said yes. I get him out. But then after that, I had an episiotomy just done on me. No, like, nobody asked. The girl just did it, and it was a resident, and I was like, are they allowed to do this? Like,
No.
So that was great. She did that. I mean, after that, Lucas came out, and when Lucas came out, I remember. So I was losing a lot of blood and I was passing out. So I wasn't even aware that he was out. And he breathed and he cried as soon as he came out, as they would. So they like flopped him back onto me, saying I could hold him. But at that point I passed out. So they basically flopped him onto me and I wasn't even conscious to know what was going on. And then when I like kind of like came to and went to hold him, they just took him. They just picked him up and took him, and I was like, "Oh, okay, you can have him." I guess it was crazy. I had a really good experience there. Like, everybody was wonderful, but it was definitely not what I had pictured my birth was going to be, even with the complications. Like, I was like, "This is." I was like, I did not. I feel like I could have maybe I couldn't have, and they would have had to do the episiotomy anyway. But I was like, you could have asked
Waited
at least,
or
or waited a few more times to make sure it was absolutely necessary. But yeah, so he came out and he cried, and we were crying and emotional because we just had a baby that we were told wasn't going to make it. We were so beyond blessed to see him crying and hear that. We were just very emotional about it. And Lucas was able to, like, they did his checks on him like they do, and then he was able to like hang out with us and got to hold him, and Dallin got to hold him, and my mom was there.
So cute.
Yeah, and we got to hold him, and then they tried like the feeding him, and then he went to the NICU because he was struggling feeding, but we were anticipating that, so that wasn't like a huge shock.
Right, because to confirm, he did have the cleft lip and palate.
Yeah.
Quite severe.
Yeah,
too,
it was severe. He was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate, and his premaxilla was like pushed up, so his whole like part of his lip, so his lips were completely spread open, and his like front part went like this, so he didn't have nostrils or anything like that. It was just like the bridge of his nose and then up. So, and he had no palate at all, so no hard or soft palate. It was just completely open. Like, you could shove your finger up there and it would pop out his nose. Like, his anatomy was crazy. It was super interesting when he was first born, actually.
Wow.
But yeah, he was born. He went to the NICU just because of the feeding. And then he was in the NICU for a week. And just because they were trying to see if he could handle doing bottles. But he was just too slow. He would get too much air because his anatomy was so open.
Yeah.
So then they placed what's called an NG tube. And that's the feeding tube that goes up through your nose and into the stomach. So he had that. And then we had to learn how to use it because he was going to go home with it. But the NICU didn't have the capacity at the time to keep him. So Lucas got transferred from the Foothills Hospital NICU to the Children's Hospital. And then he was there for another week while they did a bunch of tests on him because of this gene disorder. And his cleft lip and palate. So he was in the hospital for a week. They did a scan on, his heart, his brain, everything, just to make sure it was okay, because they didn't know what to expect with this gene disorder.
And everything else looked good.
Everything was fine. He was good. Everything was where it should be. He was all good. Besides his umbilical cord. So when he came out, there was that glob of whatever it was. To this day, they couldn't even tell us what it was.
Really?
That was just stuck. So Dallin cut the cord when he came out, and, they have the little stump or whatever. They thought it would just fall off. Like, they didn't know. So after being a week in the children's hospital, we got discharged and could come home. We learned how to use the feeding tube. Thinking back on it now, it's terrifying. Like, it was terrifying. I didn't even want to feed him at all. Like, I had such fear of putting something through this tube to go into his little body's stomach. And I think I grieved a lot because breastfeeding wasn't an option.
Yeah, it wasn't your typical experience.
Yeah, my motherhood looked different than everybody else's motherhood, and I think that really, really got me a bit, because I was like, well, I can't breastfeed, and I tried pumping, but when I say we had an appointment every week for the first 8 months, we had an appointment every week. We were constantly at the hospital, constantly monitored. Lucas was constantly getting blood drawn, constant emergency stays. Like, the first year of his life was crazy. And a lot of guilt came with that. And we were trying to make it as normal as we could, but it was just, I tried pumping and it just wasn't, I couldn't pump. My mental health just wasn't there to just pump every 2 hours when we were going to the hospital, coming home, all this stuff. So we missed, I feel like I missed out on a lot of the traditional roles of what you get to do in motherhood. I didn't get that, which is unfortunate, but yeah.
Wow. What a journey. And you're so right. It is no doubt that your mental health would take a huge toll. And my heart just goes out to you guys, because that transition into parenthood is difficult enough as it is, let alone with all these outside voices coming at you about the possible negative outcomes. And, and so, I'm just so sorry for that. But I'm really grateful and so amazed that he was able to pull through and really come through with manageable outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay, so from that moment, you were dealing with feeding tubes and stuff like that. And remind me, how old is he now?
19 months.
19 months. Crazy. Okay, so in those 19 months, at what point did he start receiving surgeries to repair the cleft lip and palate, I guess?
Yeah.
Walk us through what that looked like.
Yeah, so Lucas has had 5 surgeries so far in his life. So he had his first surgery when he was 2 weeks old. That was just to remove his umbilical cord completely. And then Lucas had because Lucas's cleft was so severe, his plastic surgeon wanted to do it in 2 parts, because she felt it would benefit him in the long term to repair his lip in 2 parts instead of pushing it all together into one. She just thought it would be better to do what's called a lip adhesion first, and then the full repair a few months down the road. So when Lucas was 6 months old, we actually just came up on his year anniversary for his first stage lip repair. It was on January 18th, 2024. He had his first stage lip repair, but he also had his first stage lip repair, a G-tube, and ear tubes. So with cleft kids, because they don't have the muscles in their palate, and it's something about their ear, how our ears drain, they're more prone to ear infections, fluid in the ears, fluid buildup. Yeah. So Lucas got his first set of ear tubes for that, and ever since he's had them, he's been great. His hearing has been really good, which is great.
Awesome.
And then, so what they did for the first lip adhesion is it's so weird, but she took his lip and she attached the lip here and had a strip here. So if you remember how he looked before, it was his lips came up to here and then he had a strip, so it would be together. So now he would have 2 little nostrils that he didn't have before. So cute. And I remember I actually have a video in my memories of me taking the tape off for the first time after his surgery and being wow, my kid has nostrils, because he didn't have it before. And just these little things that we deal with when we have a baby born with a cleft lip and palate, that it's normal to have nostrils, so a parent wouldn't be excited that his has nostrils. But for me and Dallin, we were oh my gosh, look at his constructed little nostrils. So it was great. And then because his feeding tube with his NG tube at the time, he was still aspirating and having a lot of trouble before his palate was repaired. They opted to put a G tube in, different kind of feeding tube than the NG that goes through the nose. And it was just a feeding tube directly into his tummy. So he had that done, all 3 of those at once. And I remember it was hard. Like surgery is always super hard and the recovery is really hard. And they just scream and cry.
For a
and
baby, like how do you console a baby after surgery?
yeah, you just have to let them scream and cry. And that was really tough. So that was when he was 6 months. And then at the end of May, so right before he turned 1, he had his final lip repair and then a change of ear tubes. So they changed his ear tubes, and then he had his, we call in the Cleft community, like a forever smile. So he received his forever smile on May 28th, and that's when his whole lip was done. And it was actually crazy because we moved literally 2 days after he had surgery. So it was crazy. He had surgery on May 28th, and we moved on like May 30th and May 31st. So it was crazy. We had a lot of family that helped us and support us. So it was very nice to have them. But it was crazy because we would like have Lucas sleep at my parents' house, and then all of a sudden he was recovering, but then in a brand new place that he had no idea where he was, and it wasn't what he was used to. So that recovery was a little worse than before. But it was crazy. But he had his forever smile. His tape came off within a week, and he was very swollen, and it was very hard. But it was so nice to see just like his beautiful little smile that he now has now. Oh yeah,
he's such a smiley kid.
He is. He's a very smiley kid. And then he had that surgery, and then in October, so just this past October, he had his full palate repaired. That one was probably the scariest surgery we've ever had. I'm terrified for him to have another one. He had quite a bit of complications with this one. He actually had COVID, and we had no idea.
Oh no.
So once he was coming out of the anesthetic after his palate repair, his throat just like swelled completely shut. So they had to intubate him, and he was sedated and intubated for a week with a breathing tube in the ICU for a week. And that was a big thing. He had tubes, wires everywhere. He was sedated. We couldn't pick him up. We couldn't hold him. We didn't see him awake for a week. It was crazy.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
so hard.
Was there concern with that failing? Because I know as adults, intubation is really serious. So is it more serious with children that there's a risk of, dying intubated?
They weren't too worried about that. I don't think that was a concern. It was just as long as he was intubated and had the breathing tube in his throat, he was okay. But it was just completely swollen around the tube. So when they re-intubated him, so they unintubated him after surgery and then re-intubated him, they had to use a smaller tube because his airway was just so blocked off.
A lot of trauma.
So, and then he also had just had his whole palate repaired. So it was a risk of, are we going to do this all over again if his palate comes apart? So not only were we worried about that, we were worried about our son with his breathing tube in the ICU, and it was crazy. I'm really thankful that my work was so understanding. So I originally just took off like 3 days and then let it into the weekend, and I ended up taking 2.5 weeks off that they were like really gracious to let me take off, which was good. Awesome. But yes, when you see your son just like lying in a hospital bed, sedated with this tube down his throat, it's intense, and I never thought,
With the palate repair, is it typical that they need more than one, or is it usually just they need one repair for the palate?
Normally, according to like the plastic surgeon we have, like I'm sure everywhere is different depending on where you are, but our plastic surgeon said normally one repair. And with Lucas, he had no palate at all, and she did it all in one. But there's like I follow a lot of Cleft moms on Instagram and stuff and are in touch with them, and they'll say like, oh, we did the soft palate first, or we did the hard palate first, or my son only had the soft palate and had his hard palate or something like that. So I think it just is circumstantial to your child specifically. But for Lucas, it was one and done. Yeah.
That's awesome. Actually, I'm appreciating that you brought up the fact that you follow other Cleft palate moms out there. Because we wanted to ask how you were receiving support at that time. You said that family's been really supportive, but how were you managing just such a unique situation? And were you able to meet with other moms in similar situations in person, or was that just online? Like, what did that look like for you?
So When I didn't really, like I mentioned, like I wasn't so focused on his cleft lip and palate before he was born,
Right.
but afterwards, I just found like this huge community, and believe it or not, cleft lip and palate is very common. Like you guys wouldn't even like going to the Children's Hospital for Lucas's appointment at the Cleft clinic. So many people are there, and you could tell like,
and I'm sure that's
and
encouraging
it's very encouraging, and it's very comforting to know that we're not. It's a very isolating feeling at first, and it's very nice to see that. Well, no, we're not the only people going through this. I think it's 1 in every 700 babies are born actually with a cleft lip and palate.
Super common.
So it's the most common birth defect out there. Yeah. So I found just a bunch of cleft moms. They're all pretty much in the States, but I follow so many cleft moms on Instagram, and they post about their kids' journeys, and they're so open with their kids' journeys, and that's why it's made me be so open with my kids' journey, because I'm like, I see them, and sometimes if there was a struggle or something was happening, I would reach out to one of them on Instagram, and we would talk about it and things like that, and they'd be like, oh, well, my son is 6 and had a bilateral cleft lip, and we went through all of this, and it's just comforting, a very comforting community. Yeah. And then there's like a Facebook group for like Alberta Children's Hospital families, and like families that visit there all the time and stuff. So there was a few people there that we got in touch with. There was actually one girl posted in the Cleft group, just not like worldwide Cleft group, not specific to Canada or anything. And she was upset because her son's palate surgery got canceled because he was sick. And I had commented on it, and it was right in the same time Lucas had his and was sick and now had all these complications. And I had commented on the post saying, I know it's frustrating for your kid's surgery to be postponed, but my son just had a surgery and he's in the ICU because he was sick and we didn't even know. And she was like, oh, we actually just heard of a similar case at the hospital my son was supposed to be at. It was the Children's Hospital, and she was literally talking about Lucas, and it was just a small world. Whoa. So she doesn't live in Calgary, and she's a young mom too, and her baby was born with like just a cleft palate, but she lives kind of near Edmonton, and she comes here. No way. So it's just like such a small world that you just don't know. So I find a lot of community in that, and even like family and like our normal friends and family, everybody that we've encountered so far has been so supportive of Lucas. And I'm sure we're gonna have one day where we're gonna hear the rude comments or see the stares, and it's just inevitable. But at this point in time, like everybody we've encountered has been great, even out in public, like going to a restaurant and things like that. And Lucas, like, you can tell he had something, like his scar is pretty prominent and stuff like that. But everybody we see is always so gracious and nice and always compliments Lucas and things like that, which is super nice. Because it's definitely, as a mom, I worry, like, okay, like, what's somebody going to say? And there's going to be people out there that do that. And I know that. And I've read, like, other moms going through it and things like that. But it's crazy how well of a support that we've had. Yeah. Whether it's online or in person. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure like knowing that support is there will help buoy you up for when those times do come. Like you'll be mentally prepared, and you'll be able to raise Lucas and help him be aware and know what to say or how to feel, and instill that confidence in him as well. So yeah, that's awesome. I'm really glad that we have that access to that.
Yeah. So I'm curious because it sounds like the first year and a bit of his life has been a lot. And you guys were in a pretty new relationship when you found out you were expecting. So I'm just curious, like how this going through this experience together has impacted and shaped your relationship.
Yeah. So I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty tough at the beginning when Lucas was first born, I was diagnosed with severe postpartum depression. I had immense guilt. Like it just branched out from like, why didn't my body create Lucas properly? Why us? Yeah. Like you never think something is going to happen to you until it does. Like you never think you're that person it's going to happen to until it does. And I struggled personally a lot with postpartum depression and just like feeling down all the time. Like I did want to be Lucas's mom, but I didn't want to be Lucas's mom. And I wanted to be in my life and I wanted to enjoy it, but I didn't. And I wanted to be elsewhere and I didn't want to be there. And so my relationship with my fiance now, Dallin, took a huge hit. Yeah. And it was really hard. There were times where you know, we always talk about like the roommate phase, like everybody goes through that roommate phase, but it was like the first probably 6 months of Lucas's life up until that surgery, you know, adjusting to parenthood is hard, and adjusting, navigating now 3 people instead of just you guys. Like me and Dallin weren't fully even established yet as a couple. And then we welcomed this baby who has extra needs. So it took a hit, and it took us a long time to get to where we are now. We just had to focus. Dallin was really good at helping and being supportive and stuff. But it was mainly me that I had to work on myself and getting back to where I was beforehand. So there was a lot of times where like Dal and I like didn't hang out, or we didn't go on dates, or we didn't focus on each other. It was just I had to get back to feeling like me before I could give myself back to Dallin. And he was very patient in waiting, but our relationship did take a hit for a hot while. It was my postpartum depression just took over everything, and I didn't care about anything else. All the medical stuff that we were going through, like I felt such struggle because I'm like, my son's going through all these medical needs. That's my fault. Like, why didn't my body do this? And then it would just lead to fights because, you know, Dallin would try to be supportive and be like, well, no, like it was random. It's not you. Like this was like getting struck by lightning. Like it's not our fault. But then it'd be like me just bickering back, like, oh no, like it is me. Like you can't tell me it's not.
You're not thinking quite logically. When you're depressed.
So there's just a lot of fighting, and a lot of like times where it was like the roommate phase, but like extreme. Like I was very protective. It was weird because it was like I didn't want to be there, but I also didn't want anybody else to watch Lucas but me. Like I was like, you can't hold him. Like I have him. Like I'll deal with him type stuff. So it took us a while to navigate. I would say after Lucas's first surgery is when I was kind of like, okay, well, this isn't my fault. Like I started going to therapy and started getting better, and was like, why don't we focus on like, we have an amazing support system. Both our parents live here. Like we can give Lucas to them. We can watch him, even a movie, like doing something like that. So it took a bit, but we are very strong now. And it's tough because you hear all the time, like people break up after having a kid, or people, and for us, it was like, oh, we just met, we just started dating, now we're pregnant, but now we're going through pregnancy complications. Oh, now we have this baby, and now we have all this baby with this medical needs on top of being new parents, on top of not even have had a super established relationship to begin with. So it took us a long time to get to where we are now.
Do you feel like you've come out stronger on the other side?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Dallin, I'm going to cry. No. He's seen me at literally the darkest point in my life, but he's literally seen me at the highest point in my life. So I feel like there's nobody else that I'd rather be with than Dallin, really, after all of that stuff. And it's super hard when we look back on everything, but we're like, we're still here, and we're not perfect. We still argue, we still bicker at each other and things like that, but it's amazing how far we've come, and like the bonds we've created with like Lucas and things like that have been way better.
Very special relationships between the three of you, for sure. You've been through a lot of things that a lot of people can't relate to.
Yeah, and that's what I tell Dallin too. I was like, we went through a lot in a very short period of time.
Period of time.
We're still here, and we're still strong, and it hasn't been without struggles and fights and, you know, arguments and things like that. Yeah. But we're there.
Wow.
We're at a really good point now, and
that's so great. Do you mind expanding a little bit more on what you did to get back to yourself? You mentioned therapy. Did anything else help you to feel grounded as a new mom and just like a new sense of self?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. So I did therapy, and I guess like, one thing, I don't know if it's weird to mention on the podcast, but like just like finding God too. Like I grew up like kind of in a religious household, but not really. Like my family didn't really practice. Like I would go to church and stuff, and, you know, kind of lost it, didn't like whatever. And then being pregnant with Lucas, you know, we leaned a lot on kind of that side of things and leaned a lot on God. And I feel like moving past the postpartum depression was, you know, the therapy and like kind of leaning on God, that it was his plan and it wasn't my fault. That was the biggest thing, was like just blaming myself for like my body not creating him right and stuff like that. And just like thinking, well, no, this was God's plan and this is how Lucas was meant to be, kind of I found comfort in that personally. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I understand that completely. And you're right. It might not look the same for everybody, but I think generally everybody needs that sense of purpose and that's not just random or, seeking someone else to blame, specifically yourself, I think is huge, huge. And can be spoken for a lot of moms just in general. I think postpartum depression and anxiety and things like that, a lot of moms do blame themselves for that.
Well, I mean, me too. Like, even I had a bit of a complicated birth as well. And like after that, it was like, I still deal with this a little bit. It's like, why didn't my body do what it was supposed to do?
Yeah.
Why didn't it do the thing that it was supposed to do?
And the thoughts just eat at your brain, and you just, 100%.
And I'm sure, well, because you and I have talked extensively about our experiences, and you mentioned that your sister had a baby a couple weeks prior. And so I'm sure maybe you can speak a little bit on this, of the comparison kind of game that happens, I think, with a lot of women just in general, but especially when you have such a different looking experience to a lot of people. Do you mind speaking briefly on that comparison, and like, how can other moms not dwell on somebody else's experiencing looking different to yours?
Yeah, I mean, we're human and we're going to compare. I feel like it's inevitable. That's what our brains are wired to do. You do that. And yeah, my sister had, a healthy pregnancy, like, I hate using the word normal, but like normal birth, like, and typical birth. And it was really hard. It was extremely hard to watch her. And I'm like, you're not at the hospital every week. Like, you're not at an appointment. You're not in an emergency room because your kid pulled their feeding tube out at 2 a.m. and you have to go back to the hospital to get it back in. Like, it was really tough to not compare. And like, even at that point too, everybody around me was having babies, and I was like, I can't breastfeed. I can't, like, I'm not doing this. Like, it was super hard to just realize that, okay, my motherhood's different, but that's okay. Like, I'm blessed enough. I'm blessed with Lucas, and I'm blessed to have this experience, although it's different than what you would typically find motherhood in right now, that I just found the joy of like, well, my son's here, and you just have to keep going. And I'm blessed that he's even here when we were told he wasn't going to be here. And I think it was really hard. It was hard not to, I mean, I still compare. I still sometimes will be like, oh, my baby's not doing that, or their baby's doing that, my baby's not doing that. But it's just, every baby's different, and you can't compare, but you can't compare. And I'm just blessed. Whenever I start comparing, or like during the summer when our babies were newborns and my sister, would sit there and breastfeed, and I'd be like squeezing a syringe with formula in it to my baby, I was like, this sucks. But I'm like, well, I'm still blessed he's here. And even though it's not what I thought motherhood would look like for me, I still get to be a mom to this baby. And I'm grateful for that.
It sounds like you developed a skill of reframing things. So I like that you also acknowledge that it's there, because a lot of times people like to sweep stuff like that under the rug, right? Like, oh, I'm just not going to acknowledge that I'm comparing.
I know that I compare. I know that it happens.
That's great. That's great. You're right. I think it is such a natural process. But I think the skill of, okay, I can acknowledge this, but I'm also going to address that I can look at this a little bit differently. Like, I'm so grateful for this. I think gratitude is huge in being able to change our mental standpoint. And so that's an excellent habit to build.
I think too, just to build off what you were saying, like, to be grateful, but also not using gratitude as like a means of bypassing emotions. Too.
It doesn't become like toxic positivity.
Like being grateful that he's here. And then also still being like, I can be grateful for this and be grieving the fact that my motherhood's different than I wanted it to be. And those two things can exist simultaneously.
Exactly.
Like, you don't just have to be grateful and then try to like shut down those like less comfortable feelings.
Yes. 100%.
That's amazing. So just to wrap up, Brittany, I feel like there's so much more we could talk about. So maybe we do, I feel like every guest we have on, we've said like, maybe we do part two. Or part three. We split this one up even. But just to wrap things up, what are 2 pieces of advice that you would give to cleft lip, cleft palate parents, or just parents with medically complex babies? Let's start with that one question. What's a piece of advice that you would give to medically complex parents with medically complex babies?
I would just say take it one day at a time. Like, don't think of what's down the road. Just one day at a time. Every single day is a gift, and just take that one day at a time.
Amazing.
Because I just always found I would jump ahead, but no, you just one day at a time.
Yeah. And number two, I feel like it's similar, but what has been your biggest like celebration over the last 19 months?
Just like seeing my son grow up and seeing him, you know, do these things that we were just, it's really special just to watch him hit milestones and just to see him become this little toddler when we were told all these horrible things in the beginning. And just, I look at him sometimes, if I'm like sitting on the couch sometimes and I look at him playing, I'm like, wow, like that's my son. Like like that's him. And it's just, his whole life is just worth celebrating.
Yeah. Well, especially, and I meant to wrap up, but I also want to touch on, because I don't think we've quite finished the story, because he no longer is using a G-tube, right? So he has officially been cleared to have foods, and he's toddling around and happy and healthy. And so how's that new process looking for you guys with no more feeding tube? His lips and palate have been cleared and all sealed back up. So how's life looking for you guys now?
It's crazy. It's like nothing ever happened. Like it's just, he demands a cookie and we give it to him and he walks around with his cup in his hand and he drinks, and it's just, I didn't think we'd get to that point. Like he would fail so many like swallow studies, like to show like if he was aspirating, and it just, at times it just never felt like we would get off the feeding tube. But now that he's like, the feeding tube is still in his tummy, we're just not using it.
Okay.
But just seeing him just like waking up and like giving him a meal for breakfast and like watching him, especially watching him drink like liquids, it's really special to us, because we're like, wow, we didn't think that he would ever be able to do this on his own. So it's just, so special.
That is so cool. Yeah. And I'm so pleased to hear that. Yeah. I really would love to talk more about this. There's always more questions, always more. And I feel like as things continue on, I think there will be some follow-ups with professionals that will probably continue, right? Is that how it goes? Okay.
Yeah, like he has a whole team, and we see them like once every 6 months now. Whereas when he was first born, it was like once every week. So so seeing them like once every 6 months, and they just ask how he's doing. You know, they check his ears and things like that, and they just make sure he's okay, making sure he's gaining weight good, and
amazing. Okay. You guys have made it to the other side.
We have.
I'm so proud of you.
Thanks. I'm very proud of us too.
That's so great. Yeah. Very awesome.
So good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brittany, for taking the time and sharing such a vulnerable story, and hopefully for, the time that it takes to relive those experiences. I hope that you come away just feeling really proud of yourself and knowing that you're so strong and capable. Yes. You're an amazing mother.
Oh, thank you, amazing mom. You guys. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to talk about it. Thanks.
And if you haven't already, like and subscribe so we can keep bringing you new guests and keep this podcast going.
Perfect. Thanks so much, guys. Much love. Bye.